Samuel lived alone on a stretch of land that seemed endless, with the desert sun beating down on his back every morning. His farm sat miles away from the nearest neighbor, and the long dirt road that led to the highway was rarely touched by travelers. From a distance, the small wooden house, weather-worn barn, and fields of dry crops looked like an island in the middle of the desert. For Samuel, this was life, quiet, hard, and empty. He had grown used to it, but deep inside, a loneliness lingered like an old wound that never healed. Every day followed the same rhythm. At dawn, he would rise from his creaky bed, pull on the same faded shirt, and step outside to face the land. The chickens would be restless, clucking loudly as if demanding his attention. The cows needed milking and the horses needed feeding. Samuel moved through these chores with practiced hands, but there was no joy in it. His animals were his only company. When he spoke, it was only to calm a horse or to call the dog that followed him around. Sometimes he would go days without hearing another human voice. His meals were simple. Bread he baked once a week, beans, sometimes dried meat, and water from the well. He often sat at the small wooden table in his kitchen, staring at the empty chair across from him. It wasn't as though he had never dreamed of sharing his life. In his younger years, Samuel imagined finding a wife, building a family, and filling his home with laughter. But those dreams slipped away. He was too shy, too quiet, and too busy trying to keep the farm alive. Life moved on, and people he once knew moved into towns, got married, and raised children. Samuel remained where he was, working the soil with no one to share the harvest. At night, when the desert cooled and the stars spread wide across the sky, Samuel would sit on his porch with a cup of coffee. The silence was deep, broken only by the cry of an owl or the rustle of the wind in the dry grass. Sometimes he would lean back and close his eyes, imagining what it would feel like to have someone sitting beside him. A laugh, a gentle word, a hand to hold. These were things he never knew. He had shaken hands at the market, nodded to strangers, and spoken to shopkeepers, but the simple touch of closeness had never entered his life. It was a secret longing he carried quietly, never daring to admit it aloud. Despite his loneliness, Samuel was strong in his own way. He worked from sunrise to sunset, mending fences, plowing the soil, and repairing tools. His hands were rough, marked by years of hard labor, and his back ached at the end of each day. Yet he kept going because the farm was all he had. There were moments of pride, too, like when a calf was born healthy or when the fields turned green after the rare rain. Those were the moments that reminded him why he stayed, why he didn't abandon the farm like so many others did when times got hard. But there was an emptiness he could not ignore. It showed itself in small ways. When he fixed himself a plate of food, he always put the spoon down too loudly, as if the silence pressed too hard against his ears. When he heard laughter drifting faintly from the road, carried by travelers heading toward town, his chest tightened. Even when he passed the mirror, he sometimes paused, staring at his own reflection, wondering how his face had grown older without anyone noticing. His eyes carried a tiredness, and his smile, when it appeared, was faint and fleeting. Once in a while, Samuel would drive his wagon to the town market. The townspeople recognized him, though they didn't know him well. They greeted him kindly, but their lives were busy. He was the man who bought supplies, spoke little, and returned to his farm. He watched young men with their wives, couples holding hands, children running across the dusty streets. He felt like a shadow among them, present but unseen. On those trips, he bought only what was necessary: flour, salt, oil, and sometimes a bit of sugar for coffee. He never lingered, never joined the chatter, and when the wagon turned back toward the wide desert, a strange mix of relief and sorrow filled his chest. There was another side to Samuel that few ever saw. Though his life was plain, he carried a heart full of kindness. He rescued injured animals, nursed stray dogs back to health, and once spent a whole night in the cold barn tending to a sick horse. He had patience, the kind that came from years of struggle, but no one was there to see it, no one to share in the quiet goodness he lived by. His life was like a book that no one opened, filled with pages of silence and untold feelings. As the years went on, he grew more used to the quiet, but the ache remained. It was especially sharp during certain seasons. When spring came and the air carried the smell of fresh growth, he longed for someone to walk beside him in the fields. When winter winds howled around the house, he wished for a warm voice inside. Even the rain, rare and sudden in the desert, reminded him of companionship, because the sound of it on the roof felt like music that should have been shared. His loneliness was not born of bitterness, but of a life that simply passed him by. Samuel was not angry at the world, nor jealous of others. He had accepted his place in life, though deep down he still wished quietly for something more. He often thought of his mother, who had told him as a boy that everyone deserved love, that hearts were not made to be alone forever. But time had a way of convincing him otherwise. He told himself that maybe his chance had slipped away, that his life was meant to remain as it was: work, silence, and survival. Yet the desert has a way of bringing surprises, just when they are least expected. Samuel could not know that change was already drawing near, carried by footsteps he had not yet seen, and by a presence that would turn his lonely farm into something very different. For now, though, he remained unaware, living one day at a time, trapped between the wide skies above and the empty silence within. His life was like the endless stretch of land, hard, dry, and waiting for rain. The day began like any other for Samuel. The sun rose slowly, spreading orange light across the horizon, and the desert came alive with the sound of insects and the distant call of birds. Samuel pulled on his boots, filled a bucket of water for the animals, and started his chores. Yet something felt different that morning. As he walked along the fence line, he noticed something unusual. The ground by the creek was marked with footprints, too small to belong to his horses, too light to belong to cattle. They were human footprints. He stopped and stared, bending down to study them closely. They were fresh, pressed firmly into the damp earth. Whoever left them had passed by not long ago. Samuel's first thought was caution. Strangers rarely came this far out into the desert. He was used to living alone, and anyone who wandered so deep into his land raised questions. He followed the tracks a short distance, his dog trotting quietly behind him. The prints moved along the creek, then vanished into the brush where branches were broken as if someone had passed through in a hurry. Samuel squinted, scanning the land ahead, but saw nothing. The desert stretched quiet and wide, offering no answers. That night, as he sat on his porch with a cup of coffee, he noticed a faint curl of smoke in the distance, rising against the darkening sky. Someone had lit a fire not too far from his land. He watched it for a long time, unsure if he should investigate. His instincts told him to stay put, but his curiosity stirred. It had been years since anyone unexpected appeared near his farm. The next day brought the answer. Samuel was in the barn repairing a loose plank when he sensed movement behind him. He turned sharply, his hammer still in hand, and froze. Standing near the barn entrance was a woman. Her clothes were dusty. Her long dark hair fell loosely over her shoulders, and her face carried the weariness of someone who had traveled far. She didn't look frightened, though her eyes held both caution and strength. Samuel's voice caught in his throat. He had not spoken to a stranger in weeks, and the suddenness of her appearance left him unsure of what to say. "Can I help you?" he asked finally, his voice low but steady. The woman stepped closer, her movements calm and deliberate. "I mean no harm," she said softly. "My name is Ayanna." Her accent carried the rhythm of the Apache people, and her words were clear. Samuel nodded slowly, lowering the hammer. "You're far from town," he said. "I've been walking for many days," she explained. "I was looking for safe ground, somewhere to rest. I saw your farm." There was a silence between them, broken only by the sound of a horse shifting in its stall. Samuel studied her carefully. Her clothes were worn, and her face showed the marks of sun and wind. She carried no weapon that he could see, only a small bundle tied with cloth. There was no threat in her posture, only exhaustion. Samuel's natural caution told him to keep his distance. He had lived alone too long to welcome strangers easily. Yet something in her calm voice eased his worry. She did not demand anything. She did not try to step inside. She simply stood waiting for his decision. "You must be thirsty," Samuel said at last. He set down the hammer and went to the water pump. Filling a tin cup, he handed it to her. She accepted it with both hands, drinking slowly, as though every drop mattered. When she finished, she whispered, "Thank you." Samuel offered her food next, leading her to the kitchen. He placed bread and beans on the table. Ayanna ate quietly, every movement careful and respectful. Samuel sat across from her, watching in silence. He realized how strange it felt to have someone sitting at his table after so many years. The empty chair no longer looked so lonely. When the meal was done, Ayanna explained more of her story. Her people had faced many hardships, and she had been moving from place to place, searching for peace. She did not speak of anger or blame. She spoke simply of the need to find shelter, to survive. Samuel listened intently, drawn to the steady strength in her words. "You can rest in the barn tonight," he said finally. "There's clean hay and space enough." Ayanna nodded in gratitude. "I will not trouble you for long. Tomorrow I can move on." But Samuel surprised himself when he said, "No rush. Rest as long as you need." The words left his lips before he had time to think them through. He wasn't sure why he said them, only that the thought of her leaving so quickly felt wrong. That night Samuel sat again on his porch staring at the stars. But the silence felt different. He knew someone else was nearby, resting in his barn. For the first time in years, his farm did not feel like a lonely island. He wondered about her, where she came from, what she had seen, and why her eyes carried both strength and sadness. The following morning, Samuel awoke earlier than usual. When he stepped outside, he was surprised to see Ayanna already at work. She was at the water pump, filling a bucket for the animals. She moved with quiet skill, as if farm chores were not strange to her. When Samuel approached, she looked up and smiled faintly, though her expression still carried caution. "You don't have to do that," Samuel said. "I know," Ayanna replied simply, "but it is good to be useful." Samuel nodded, unsure of what else to say. Together they carried water to the animals, their steps falling into rhythm. It was an unusual sight, two people working side by side where there had always been only one. As the day passed, Ayanna continued to help. She mended a tear in the chicken coop wire, gathered eggs, and even showed Samuel a trick to calm a restless horse. Samuel was surprised by her knowledge. She explained that her people had always lived close to the land, and she had learned these skills from childhood. By evening, Samuel found himself speaking more than he had in months. He asked about her journey, and she told him pieces of her story. He shared little about himself, but she listened quietly, her eyes steady and attentive. It was strange for him to be heard, truly heard after so many years. That night, as Samuel prepared for bed, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of anticipation. Tomorrow, he thought, she would still be here. The silence of the house no longer pressed so heavily against him. He didn't realize it yet, but something had already shifted. The arrival of Ayanna had begun to stir life into the emptiness of his world. For Samuel, the days of endless solitude were slowly beginning to change, though he could not yet see where this path would lead. The desert, which had always mirrored his loneliness, now held a new presence. And though he told himself she would move on soon, a small part of him hoped she would stay. The days that followed brought a new rhythm to Samuel's farm. Where silence once ruled, now there was the sound of two people moving about, working together. At first, Samuel thought Ayanna would stay only for a short while, but one day stretched into the next, and soon her presence began to feel natural, as though she had always been there. Ayanna proved to be more than a guest. She rose early in the morning, sometimes before Samuel, and began helping with chores. She carried buckets of water, gathered eggs, and even guided the horses with a calm hand. Samuel watched her quietly, surprised at her skill. She worked with ease, as though she understood the rhythm of the land as well as he did. The strangest part for Samuel was how much lighter his burden felt. For years he had carried every task alone, his back bending under the endless weight of labor. Now when Ayanna stood beside him, lifting hay or repairing a fence, the work no longer felt so heavy. It wasn't only her strength, but the quiet companionship she brought. He found himself smiling at moments he never would have before, like when a stubborn chicken escaped and Ayanna laughed as she chased it back into the coop. In the evenings, after the chores were done, they often sat by the fire. Samuel would bring out a pot of beans or bread and they would share a simple meal. Conversation started slowly, with small questions and answers, but soon their talks grew longer. Ayanna spoke of her people, telling stories passed down from elders, of rivers that once ran strong, of songs sung beneath the stars, of struggles and survival. Her words painted pictures Samuel had never known, filling the quiet room with a richness that stirred his imagination. Samuel listened closely, his eyes fixed on her as she spoke. He admired the strength in her voice, the way she carried both pride and sorrow. He rarely interrupted, afraid to break the flow of her stories. For the first time in years, he felt as if his home was alive. Sometimes she asked him questions too. She wanted to know about his life, his family, his past. At first, Samuel answered with short phrases, unused to speaking so much about himself. But slowly he opened up. He told her about his childhood on the farm, about his parents who worked hard until the land became his. He admitted that he had dreamed of building a family, but never had the courage to seek it. Ayanna listened without judgment, her dark eyes steady and kind. One night, when the wind howled outside and the fire flickered warmly between them, Samuel laughed for the first time in a long while. Ayanna had shared a memory of her youth, a playful tale about her brothers trying to catch fish with their bare hands and failing miserably. Her laughter was light and genuine, and Samuel couldn't help but join in. The sound surprised him. It felt strange in his own mouth, like something long forgotten. But it also felt good. He realized how much he had missed laughter. With each passing day, trust grew between them. Samuel no longer saw her as a stranger, but as someone who belonged there. He noticed small things about her. The way she tilted her head when listening, the quiet hum of a tune when she worked, the gentleness with which she treated animals. These details etched themselves into his mind, warming the corners of his lonely heart. Ayanna, too, seemed to grow comfortable. She moved around the farm with ease, as though the place had welcomed her. She no longer spoke of leaving soon. Instead, she planted small herbs by the kitchen door, teaching Samuel how to use them for flavor. She showed him how to weave simple rope from desert plants. Each day she shared a piece of her knowledge, and Samuel absorbed it with gratitude. One afternoon they worked side by side, repairing a broken section of the corral. The sun was hot and sweat dripped down Samuel's brow. He glanced at Ayanna, expecting her to be weary, but she was focused, her hands steady as she tied the wooden posts. For a moment he felt a deep respect, not just for her strength but for her spirit. She had walked into his life with nothing yet, gave so much without asking in return. That evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of red and gold, Samuel and Ayanna stood together by the fence watching the horizon. Neither spoke at first, the quiet between them comfortable. Then Samuel said softly, "It feels different now." "The farm." Ayanna turned her head, her eyes thoughtful. "Because you are not alone anymore," she replied. Her words struck him deeply. He had lived alone for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to share his world. For the first time, he admitted to himself how much he needed another presence, how much he needed her. As days turned into weeks, Samuel noticed changes within himself. His steps felt lighter, his heart less burdened. He no longer dreaded the silence of evenings, because evenings now held conversation, warmth, and laughter. The house, once filled with emptiness, now carried the sound of voices, the smell of shared meals, the glow of companionship. Still, there was a quiet fear within him. He wondered if Ayanna would leave one day, continuing her journey. He did not ask, afraid of the answer. Instead, he cherished each moment, storing them like precious treasures. The smile she gave when he handed her water after a long day, the way she sat by the fire humming softly, the calm in her voice when she spoke of the stars. One night, Ayanna shared with him a story of her people's belief that every soul was like a bird searching for its true resting place. Sometimes the bird wandered for many seasons, lost and tired, until it found the branch meant for it. She looked into the fire as she spoke, her voice steady. Samuel listened silently, his chest tightening with unspoken thoughts. He wondered if, perhaps, his lonely soul had finally found the branch it had been searching for. It was still too soon to say, but the feeling was there. Quiet, steady, undeniable. Something new was growing between them, something stronger than mere companionship. For Samuel, who had once thought his life would remain empty forever, this change felt almost like a miracle. By the third week of Ayanna's stay, Samuel could no longer imagine the farm without her. Each corner of his land seemed brighter, each chore lighter, each evening richer. She had woven herself into the rhythm of his days, filling the silence with meaning. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing with certainty. His heart was no longer as lonely as it once was. The bond between them was not loud or rushed. It grew quietly like a seed planted deep in the soil, reaching for light. Samuel did not yet call it love, and Ayanna did not speak of it, but both could feel it. Present in every shared glance, every laugh, every moment spent side by side. And so the lonely farmer who once knew only silence now lived with the steady presence of an Apache woman whose spirit had breathed life into his world. Neither of them knew where this path would lead, but both understood that something important had begun. The farm, once a place of solitude, was slowly becoming a place of belonging. Not everything was easy in the weeks that followed. The quiet bond between Samuel and Ayanna grew stronger with each passing day, but the outside world did not always share the same warmth. One afternoon, Samuel drove his wagon into town to buy supplies. As he loaded flour and beans onto the back, he felt the eyes of others watching him. Two men near the blacksmith shop whispered to each other, their glances sharp. When Samuel passed, one of them spoke loud enough for him to hear. "Strange company you're keeping these days, farmer." Samuel stopped in his tracks. He turned slowly, his jaw tightening. The man gave a mocking grin, his friend chuckling beside him. Samuel said nothing, only fixed them with a steady look before walking away. Inside, though, his chest burned. He understood the meaning of their words. News had already spread. Ayanna's presence at his farm had not gone unnoticed. When he returned home, he said little. Ayanna noticed his silence but did not ask. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Samuel finally spoke. "Some people in town, they don't think kindly of you being here." Ayanna looked into the flames, her expression calm. "I know how people see me," she said softly. "It has always been this way. I can leave if it brings you trouble." Samuel's heart tightened at her words. The thought of her leaving made his chest ache. "No," he said firmly. "You've brought life to this place. Trouble or not, I'd rather face it than lose what we've built here." A faint smile touched her lips, though her eyes still carried sadness. She had faced judgment before, and Samuel could see the weight of it. But his words offered her comfort, and for that night silence carried a sense of peace rather than fear. Yet the challenges did not end there. A drought swept across the desert, drying the soil and withering crops. Day after day the sun burned hot, and clouds passed without giving rain. Samuel walked his fields with worry etched across his face. The corn drooped, the soil cracked, and the animals grew restless with thirst. Alone, he might have been crushed by the burden, but Ayanna stood by him. Together they carried buckets from the well, watering the plants little by little. The work was endless, the heat unbearable, but neither gave up. At night their arms ached and their backs bent with exhaustion, yet they rose again each morning to try once more. Samuel marveled at Ayanna's strength. Though she was weary, she never complained. She worked beside him with quiet determination, as though the land was hers too. One evening, after hours of back-breaking labor, Samuel collapsed onto the porch steps, his shirt soaked with sweat. Ayanna sat beside him, handing him a cup of water. The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the creak of the porch boards and the far-off cry of a coyote. "I don't know if the farm will survive this," Samuel admitted, his voice low. Ayanna looked at him steadily. "The land tests us," she said, "but it also rewards those who do not give up. We will endure." Her calm confidence lit a spark in him. He realized how much her presence changed everything. Alone he might have surrendered to despair. With her he found the will to fight. The drought dragged on, but small victories gave them hope. A calf was born healthy despite the dry season. A few rows of corn survived, their leaves stubbornly green against the barren soil. Samuel began to see these moments not as chance but as signs that perseverance mattered. Each success, however small, reminded him that the farm still lived. Meanwhile, the judgment of others lingered. A week later, Samuel rode into town again. At the general store, a man muttered under his breath, "Farmer's forgotten his place." Another warned him plainly, "Best not let her stay too long, or you'll regret it." Samuel clenched his fists but held his tongue. Anger burned inside him not only for himself but for Ayanna. How could they not see her strength, her kindness? That evening, when he returned, Ayanna greeted him with her usual calm. She did not ask about town, but Samuel could not hold back. "They don't know you," he said bitterly. "They don't see what you've done here. All they see is what they want to see." Ayanna placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Do not waste your heart on their words. The desert does not ask who we are. It only asks if we can endure. That is enough." Her wisdom struck him deeply. He realized that she carried scars from a lifetime of such judgments, yet she remained strong. If she could bear it, so could he. One night, after a long day of labor, they sat outside watching the stars. The sky stretched wide, glittering with countless lights. Samuel turned to her, his heart heavy with unspoken thoughts. "You've given me more than I can ever repay," he said quietly. "This farm, this life, it was empty before you came. I don't care what anyone says. You belong here." Ayana met his gaze, her eyes shining softly in the starlight. "And you," she replied, "have given me a place to rest when I thought I had none." The words lingered between them, warm and steady. Samuel felt something shift inside him, a certainty stronger than any doubt. He knew now that his life had changed forever. But life on the farm demanded more trials. The drought worsened, and one morning Samuel awoke to find the well nearly dry. Panic rose in his chest. Without water, the animals would die and the crops would wither completely. He and Ayana spent hours searching for signs of moisture in the ground, digging shallow pits hoping for hidden streams. Their hands grew raw, their bodies weary, yet they kept working. Finally, near the edge of the creek bed, Ayana noticed a patch of soil darker than the rest. "Here," she said, kneeling. Together they dug until water seeped up cool and clear. Relief washed over them, and Samuel laughed aloud, a rare sound that echoed through the desert. Ayana smiled, her face bright despite the exhaustion. In that moment, Samuel realized that survival was not only possible but certain, so long as they faced it together. Through these struggles, Samuel's feelings deepened. It was no longer just companionship he felt for Ayana, but something stronger, something that filled the emptiness of his heart. He had once thought he would live and die alone, but now he knew that life had given him a second chance. The townsfolk could whisper all they wanted. The drought could test them as much as it pleased. Samuel no longer cared. His choice was clear. He would stand beside Ayana no matter the cost. She had turned his silent world into a place of strength, warmth, and hope, and for that he would never let her go. The days grew longer, and the desert slowly softened its hold. After weeks of hard struggle, clouds finally gathered and rain fell across the land. It was not much, but enough to breathe life back into the soil. Samuel stood on his porch one afternoon, watching the drops fall against the dry earth, and for the first time in years, he felt a surge of hope. Beside him, Ayana smiled, her dark eyes reflecting the silver of the rain. The farm began to change. Crops that had been wilting straightened with new strength. Animals grew calmer with fresh water, and the air no longer carried the same heavy dryness. Samuel and Ayana worked side by side, planting new rows of corn and beans, repairing what had been lost. Though the labor was heavy, their spirits were light. Each day felt less like survival and more like living. But the most important change was not in the land. It was in Samuel himself. He had once been a man buried in silence, carrying loneliness like a shadow. Now he found himself laughing more often, speaking more freely, and even humming while he worked. When he looked across the field and saw Ayana tending the soil with her calm hands, he felt something stir inside him that he had never known before. It was not just gratitude. It was not only trust. It was love, simple and strong, rooted deeper than the desert's oldest tree. One evening after a long day, Samuel and Ayana sat outside as the sky shifted into colors of red and gold. The air was cool, the scent of wet soil drifting around them. Samuel cleared his throat, his hands restless on his knees. He had faced storms, droughts, and solitude, yet speaking the words that weighed on his heart felt harder than all of that. "Ayana," he began slowly, "when you first came here, I thought you would stay for only a night or two. I told myself it was nothing more, but now, I can't imagine this place without you. I can't imagine my life without you." Ayana turned toward him, her face calm but her eyes shining. She did not speak, so he went on. "I don't care what the men in town say. I don't care if the whole world thinks it's strange. All I know is you've given me a reason to live again. You filled the silence of this farm with something I thought I'd never have. Warmth, laughter, and hope. You belong here, not as a guest, but as my partner." For a long moment, Ayana was silent. The only sound was the soft rustle of the wind across the desert. Then she placed her hand gently over his, her touch steady and warm. "And you," she said softly, "have given me a home, when I thought I would never find one again. I came here as a wanderer, carrying only memories and loss. But with you I have found more than shelter. I have found peace." Her words lifted the weight from Samuel's chest. Relief and joy spread through him like sunlight breaking through clouds. For the first time in his life, he knew what it meant to be chosen, not out of need but out of true belonging. From that day forward, Samuel and Ayana were no longer two separate souls crossing paths. They became one team, one family. Together they shaped the farm into more than a piece of land. It became a place of love and resilience. Ayana added small touches of her culture, planting herbs and flowers near the house, telling stories to the night sky as she had learned from her elders. Samuel built stronger fences and tilled wider fields, his strength renewed by purpose. Each of them gave what they had, and together it was enough. When Samuel went to town again, the whispers returned. Some people stared, others muttered behind his back. This time Samuel walked with his head high. He no longer felt the sting of their judgment. He had made his choice, and no voice from outside could change his heart. Ayana was his partner, and that was all that mattered. A few kind souls in town nodded at him with quiet respect, seeing the determination in his eyes. Slowly the rumors faded, replaced by acceptance, or at least silence. Seasons turned and the farm flourished. Rain returned more regularly. Crops grew strong and the animals multiplied. Samuel and Ayana worked hard, but their work carried joy. Evenings were no longer filled with silence, but with conversation, laughter, and sometimes songs. Ayana taught Samuel melodies from her people, and though his voice was rough, he sang with her under the stars. Samuel, in turn, showed her how to mend tools and build fences, skills she learned quickly. What had once been a lonely house now glowed with life. The porch where Samuel once sat alone became a place for shared coffee, quiet talks, and dreams of the future. The kitchen table, once empty except for one plate, now carried the sound of two voices sharing meals. The barn, once only a place of work, echoed with the warmth of their shared efforts. Samuel often thought back to the man he had been before Ayana came. He remembered the silence that filled every corner, the heavy loneliness he carried, and the hopeless belief that love had passed him by. He realized now how wrong he had been. Life had given him a gift in the most unexpected way, through the arrival of a woman who walked into his world and transformed it. One night, as they sat beneath the open sky, Samuel whispered, "I never knew how empty my life was until you filled it." Ayana smiled gently. "And I never knew how heavy my heart was until you gave it rest." The bond between them was not loud or dramatic. It was steady, like the rhythm of the seasons, like the growth of crops beneath the soil. It was love built on shared labor, quiet trust, and the decision to stand together no matter what came. Years would pass, and their story would become one whispered in town, not as gossip, but as a tale of endurance and love. People would remember the farmer who once lived in silence, and the woman who brought life to his farm. They would speak of how two different paths crossed in the desert and grew into something unbreakable. But for Samuel and Ayana, the meaning of their story was simpler. It was found in the everyday moments, working side by side in the fields, sharing coffee at dawn, laughing at small mistakes, holding on to each other when storms came. The loneliness that once haunted Samuel was gone, replaced by the quiet certainty that he was no longer alone. The desert, once only a place of hardship, now felt alive with possibility. The wide horizon no longer seemed empty but full of promise. Samuel, the man who had once thought he would never know the touch of love, had discovered it in the most unexpected way, and Ayana, the woman who had wandered in search of peace, had found her home in his heart. Together, they built not only a farm but a life, one rooted in strength, love, and the quiet beauty of two souls finding each other. And as the sun rose each morning over their land, it shone not on a lonely farmer but on a man and woman who had turned emptiness into belonging, and solitude into love.